Welcome back to the third episode of the Nillion podcast, where we're shining a spotlight on our founding entrepreneurs building in our ecosystem. You've got your usual co-hosts, Lucas and myself. And for today's show, we brought on Johnny from MightyNetwork. Great to have you with us, Johnny.
Thanks for having me. Great pleasure to be on episode 3.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to chat, especially because as we know, DeFi and AI and agents are all the rage. It's all everyone's talking about on crypto Twitter. So we're glad to have an expert such as yourself in the room with us today to kind of walk us through it. What does it mean? What does it mean for the future of our industry? And what does this offer as a vertical in and of itself, right? So maybe let's start at a high level. What are you building at Mighty Network, and why does that matter?
Yeah, so we like to say, think of us as the open AI operator for mobile. But at the full level, we're tapping into private on-device AI and secure data vaults by handling, things like security, compliance, and cross-chain logistics under the hood. We basically let developers build frictionlessly, creating this, personalized Web3 application that we think can scale. And to clarify, like what OpenAI operator is what OpenAI just recently announced is they want to build a system that is AI agent that can handle multi-level action steps with personalization, right? We don't fully know what they're truly building it out, but I think the space is giving us a lot of clarity around it. And we want to build a framework for developers to tap into without ever having to understand all the key modules within Web3.
That's awesome, Johnny. I think there's a lot to uncover here, right? Obviously, you touch on, I think, a lot of the key themes that we have seen, being developed and getting exciting in crypto over the last months, such as there is intents, there is account abstraction, there is agents now, obviously being the big meta, and how that all can feed into a more universal, a more simplified user experience, right? Where, complexity is essentially abstracted away from the user to get to what we were hoping for years, which is essentially making crypto seamless, right? And actually creating an experience for developers and subsequently users to use these rails without actually being exposed to it. So I guess what's useful for the audience here, given there is so much here that I think is part of your platform, is to really sort of break it down into these different core pillars, right? So there is account abstraction, there are intents, there is AI, there is agents, and then there's privacy. And I think we have to go through them step by step. But how does all of that feed into the stack you're building, and how does it differ from some of the other things that are currently being developed by other teams?
Yeah, I think it's good to first take a step back and zoom out a little bit. I think everyone hears a lot about AI, everyone hears a lot about agents, and I think everyone may have different opinions of what it is, and we also have our own take. For us, the corpus of what we're trying to tackle is we're taking what's out there, but also tackling in a sense that reflects what people are normally used to. Developers want simplicity, they also want ease, but they also want the ability to configure. So how do you marinate all three in a way that is easy to use? If you look at the most successful recent accomplishments, things like React and Next.js, these were very useful tools for developers. Someone can build a company overnight by using these tools. If you look at the Web3 space, are there any that you can do today? I would say no. Right? If you want to build a blockchain in one day, you have to go and source. Do you want to use Tendermint? Do you want to use an EVM stack? Do you want to use Reef? These are complexity questions that people have to face. It's not something that can easily be built. So we are comparably much behind than our peers within the Web2 space. So if we were to look at from just a developer tool side, it's really challenging. Second of all, the overall cumbersomeness of discovery and compliance and security is also another part. So as we approach this topic, one thing we ask ourselves, like, what do we want to focus on? We want to see more consumer success within mobile application. If you look at the space, there hasn't been that many Web3 successful mobile applications. Like there's centralized exchanges, there's Blackbird, there's Farcaster, there is OpenSea's, Uniswap. But that's pretty much it. There are not that many. And why, right? There are over 6 billion devices on a planet that are on mobile. More and more people are spending time on mobile devices. But why hasn't crypto application followed that trend? Most of things are still stuck in browsers. So at Mighty, we thought to ourselves, hey, if people are using the mobile devices every day, why not make it easier for people, not just just Web3 people, but anyone who wants to build with ease and success, following the footsteps and inspiration like Next.js, like React, like any other full stack application. So we're basically putting out an opinionated full stack that combines the best of technologies out there and letting developers build for this mobile first mobile world where they can leverage things like the secure enclave, the local AI agents that can work with the on device as well as other on chain AIs. And so we're opening a whole new world. It's untested, but I think we're pursuing something that is truly unique.
Awesome. I think that before we dive into the different areas that I touched on before, can you maybe zoom out a little bit and explain to maybe the also not technical listener what a developer experience or ultimately end user experience could look like with your platform?
Yeah, so we, like every traditional Web3, will have a chain. So ultimately, you can engage us in many ways, but at the high level, what we're trying to put out is a developer SDK that has different bundles of agentic submodules. You can think of these submodules as plug and play systems that you can use as is, or you can fork it and make your own. If people are familiar with like Hugging Face, a very popular model hosting website, you could think of us sort of like that in a way that we will put out a base flavor of what we think is the coolest, but it may not fit everyone, right? Like maybe this developer who wants to build X feature may want to fork this behavior and add something unique to it. Feel free to. We think the open source community ethos is also what we want to embrace as well. And so what that means is right off the bat, I'll give you an example. If an artist who wants to build something like Behance, which is in the United States like an Adobe artist site, if you want to sell something like NFTs or RWAs, artist work with royalties, how do you do that today, right? Like with us, our goal is to make it so simple that they can just use a few modules such as compliance, on-ramp, guardrails, as well as trading to build this application. They don't need to know what layer one protocol they're using. They don't need to know what wormhole or what wallet or MetaMask is. All that is abstracted away. So they can build their royalty-based, RWA application and still ensure that their end users are compliant. What that means, it unlocks a new world where our technology becomes the invisible force. It's the same thing as when people use Akash network. People don't really think behind the scene it's a Web3, right? Because they're getting GPUs. And I think the more we become invisible, we trigger more of those magic moments, right? And I think that's what ChatGPT did for the world. It brought that magic moment to AI. We want to do the same for Web3 so that we're invisible, powerful, but yet it works.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it's really the next iteration of enabling applications to be developed more easily, and also for users to engage with applications in a much more simplified manner. I think if you look back at the beginnings of DeFi specifically, for instance, all the clunky ways of accessing DeFi applications, then we got DeFi aggregators trying to make it a little bit easier for users to tap into the best yields, right, that they could access without having to manually go for all of the different options. This really on the developer side, what you're trying to build, right, is some sort of iteration of that, right, where we're trying to step by step make the experience for in engaging with crypto and engaging with Web3 easier, more simplified, less burdensome, so that any developer can come in and build applications on those rails, right? So if we think about these modules that you touched on, right? Can you give us some examples of that? I mean, I know there's like a security role, there's auths, there's compliance, right? Can you give us some understanding of like what a developer can tap into when it comes to these submodules, and how easy it is then for them to build additional modules into this?
Yeah, so we like the Hugging Face example alluded earlier. The idea is that we'll put out a base, base version that any developers can tap into. And if they want to build anything, they can just look up our service list to see what our services can do. If they want to build something that is within, let's say, Bitcoin ecosystem, our partnership within the Bitcoin ecosystem will enable that. And or if they want to even zoom out a little bit, they want to pull data from, let's say, Web2 social feeds. Maybe they can work with our partnership with like Camp Network, right? And so fundamentally, there's a lot of potential ways one can use things. It's just at the end of the day, as we integrate more partnerships, our goal is to provide a larger ways for developers to leverage that. And what that means is if by default they don't want to build that on-ramping, because every Web3 ecosystem has to face on-ramping, such as getting tokens to your wallet or your ecosystem and ensuring that the token is actually usable or wrapped correctly and whatnot. Uh, we handle all of that behind the scenes. So that way, something like Intense, when you say, "Hey, I'm brand new to this service. Should I do next?" The AI will say, "All right, it looks like you're brand new. Let's understand your, risk or your what you have currently." So if the person is coming in as an investor, exploring an investment app that's powered by Mighty, one thing, of course, we don't have to make sure is, are they compliant, right? So maybe the guardrails and the on ramping will take the user through that process of making sure they're compliant, they are on ramped correctly before they engage with the system. Most Web3 application, if not a great majority of them, do not have on ramping, do not have guardrails. So you're just let loose into a system that's extremely challenging for newcomers. And we think, we cannot iterate on the same scope of just the same people over and over again. We got to bring new people in. We got to have consumer adoption. We also got to make it safe, easy, and invisible, right? So that magic moment I spoke about.
So what is it that, for example, a DeFi focused AI agent built on MightyNetwork might offer users in terms of a enhanced user experience that they might not find with some of the other tooling that's out there today and being talked about?
Yeah, I think executing. So we focus on local first before using on like state of the art models on the cloud. Most services out there, like like in the Web3 space, all use frontier models for a lot of their tasks. A lot of them don't really focus on local private privacy preserving or private data usage. And I think that's important. So someone who's coming in might be intrepid about sharing all the information. Web3 is all about being open, right? But sometimes there's things that's important to keep secret and private about. And so we start at the local AI on device. We have a local model running on edge that has tapped into different data sets, private data that's locally encrypted. So what that means is, like, first off, if someone wants to say, hey, I want to buy, Pepe. I've heard about a lot of things. What is it, risk factor to me as a user? Like, one of the core things we try to do is, because we have a on ramp, because we have the guardrail, it will try to figure out, is this right for the person? No hand holding is ever generally done in Web3. We want to make it so easy that they can then guide through that. Or if they want to trade a token, right, they can just ask the AI, hey, I don't know where to start. Can I bring my money from my Bank of America or Chase Bank into buying this cryptocurrency token that I heard about? Or can you tell me a bit more about the project? And I think that's the start, right? So a lot of things starts at the research phase, discovery. And discovery is never an easy thing for Web3 because the fragmentation, more and more chain gets deployed every day. So we want to make the information seamless, right? Just like AI is able to go and grab different information, we want to make it easy for projects to hook in. So projects can then use our service modules to put in information they want, whether that's a dApp or protocol level. They can do so easily. So if Nillion once they mainnet, they can easily pipe in the information or latest campaign they want to push towards their end audience. We can easily do so with our agentic submodules. So we're opening up the door a lot. I think for that moment to come. So hopefully that answers your question.
It's funny because as you're talking about having essentially another person, it's not a person, but it's it's an LLM that's walking you through all the steps of what you have to do to get from your checking account on chain to buy, in this hypothetical example, Pepe. It reminds me of some of the early conversations I had with friends in like 2021, 2022, where there was this sort of irony that crypto was supposed to democratize access to finance, but really you couldn't get on chain unless you essentially had an IRL Sherpa, somebody that you knew and trusted and wouldn't rug you, that could walk you through all of these steps and send you gas on the destination chain and do all of these things. And without that, you were kind of always just going to be stuck on a centralized exchange trying to figure out how not to lose all your money. So we've come a long way to where what you're describing is essentially having a 24/7 personal assistant that can answer any crypto questions and not just answer them, but actually execute on these decisions or these strategies that you want to pursue on your behalf. And of course, privacy is of the utmost concern in that, right? Because you're going to be sharing a lot of sensitive data you don't necessarily want to broadcast to the world. And I'm sure we'll get to that in a bit more detail in this conversation. But for now, I wanted to hand it over to Lucas to follow up on what he was talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I actually wanted to touch on that privacy aspect because I think like the biggest differentiator that I see here obviously is number one, the massive simplification for developers to build applications in the Web3 space via modules that you expose to them without having to be experts in it, for the key building blocks of what it takes to build a successful Web3 app. Of course, the second key pillar is privacy first, right? You talked about local AI, and then you also talked about privacy preserving AI in the cloud. That enables, even if you need more computationally complex computations to be run, that to be done in a privacy preserving manner. That very much resembles Apple Intelligence, right? I know that you referred to them as well in the past sometimes, where at the moment with Apple Intelligence, it's trying to do as much as it can locally. No data leaves the phone, but of course, sometimes I need a model that's just heavy, right? That can deal with more data, that can deal with computation, more complex processes. And they're trying to use secure enclaves to facilitate that computation. How does your setup compare to that setup? Because you mentioned local first, and then the ability to also sort of process information somewhere else. Can you give the listeners maybe a better understanding of what that would mean, and maybe some examples as well of like, two users with two different tasks going through that flow?
Yeah, definitely. So, for example, our setup, Mighty Headquarter is basically one of our core features that combines local AI and a private data vault. That will all be on local phone. The idea is that the phone itself will have access to this LM similar to Apple Intelligence or Gemini if it's running on device, or ChatGPT. The idea is that this LLM will be the one to first sample the query that you put in. So if you say trade, X for Y, the idea is that it will first go through our classifiers. It will determine is it within domain, is it safe, and is it touching any private data. In this case, it's not, right? It's not touching anything yet because you're not signing anything yet at the moment. So it's going to then leverage other agentic features to take that to the next step, which is to carry out the trade on whatever network you want it to be. So that's like one example. The other one that may touch a private process is, I've traded a lot this year. Can you pull in the data from Coinbase, SushiSwap, and Uniswap and tell me how much taxes do I owe based on my income bracket, my single status, and me being in San Francisco as a resident? So behind the scene, obviously, it's not going to be 100% accurate, but that is touching private data. It's PII, right? So it's going to compute that locally, right? And if it needs to retrieve some formulas like federal reporting tax rate based on my bracket of income or all that, that's done in a way that is privacy preserving. And I think that's where services like Nillion comes into hand, because I don't want other people to know that, I'm looking at my tax and it's being identified with these wallet addresses, right? So fundamentally, these things are important. I don't want to send that to ChatGPT. So there are fundamental things that we think about that's core, but we want to also make it invisible because these things should not require thinking, and it should be magic moments for people who want to be able to leverage this and still gain the benefit of private and secure.
Awesome. So essentially, the way we could summarize it is like democratizing access to a similar setup as Apple has, but specifically for crypto developers, where they don't have to think about, how privacy actually works, right? How privacy and technologies work. But it facilitates developers by building out applications to tap into that seamlessly, such that there is local first, and whenever there's a computation more complex process that needs to happen or external data needs to be sourced somewhere, it happens somewhere else, but still in a privacy preserving manner, without them having to be experts in this, without them having to be familiar with any of the stacks, essentially. Would you say that? Perfect. Cool. That's awesome. Now, another key part of what you're building, of course, is around intents. It's about like building essentially on that theme of like making it very seamless for users to get what they want, right, without having to be very specific of what they want. And I think for the audiences, might be important to sort of understand how some of the intent meta that we see in crypto feeds into what you're trying to achieve here, right? Like in the intent meta of crypto, There are projects like Flashbots with Soaf, where they're trying to essentially abstract the way for you as a user when you interact with DeFi applications, that you have to specify exactly how things work towards exactly what you want. And then there are searchers that are enabling you to get things done. How does that sort of fit the intent side of things and the account abstraction side of things fit into what you're building with your stack at Mighty?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we combine a lot of technologies, right? I think rewinding back a little bit, we are in the age of abstraction and aggregation. We see this with every industry, right? DeFi first started with like Uniswap, but then services like Beefy came in and aggregated different services. Now we see that with bridging, right? Originally there was Wormhole, there was Layer Zero. Now you have things like LeFi, you have all these other services that make it easy for anyone to tap into. The same thing will happen to AI agents. The same thing will happen to any XY service, right? We see this even in Web 2, right? So fundamentally, what is going to aggregate all these services that allows, let's say, cross-pollination between different services? And most service today in Web 3 is a one-trick pony. Like they just do one thing very well. They don't do anything else beyond that. If you look at Web 2 counterparts, you have to introduce new features that cross-pollinate not just your product, but also innovate on it. And I think that's what we're trying to do. We're building this world where we pull things like the aggregational innovations and the abstraction innovations and building that into our core. And so we're leveraging different partners. We're also innovating on top of it by building like a single unified experience for developers. And so what that means is when someone says trade X and Y, but also behind the scene, if it requires cross chain, if it requires liquidity checking to see if there's enough to before the slippage, we do all that behind the scene by working with our partners. And what that means is our router system will be the one handling the complexity and planning that out. And so I think that's the magic moment of intent. So everyone may have different meanings of what intent will be, but our definition of intent is that we work with our partners to not only simplify the process, but ensure that as long as it's a supported route, we'll honor it, right?
So one thing that's really interesting about all of this that definitely want to touch on because it's kind of a recurring theme in these conversations is the modularity aspect, right? Of being able to build things on top of things.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point because at the end of the day, we want to perform the enablement. We don't want to stop what the imagination of tomorrow's innovation can be. And I think being producers of great frameworks leveraging great infrastructure providers out there, the core goal is that we hope that these canvas tools enable artists and creators to build these beautiful complexity while still having ownership over it. Each day we go by, we lose access to our data. Our data gets more malformed by, where we don't have a say. And I think Web3 does open the door, but if we don't make it frictionless, why would it even matter, right? What would all this process mean if it's not easy to use and actually truly secure and compliant? And I think fundamentally, as we enter this age, I think the agentic side allows us to automate a lot of these things. And I think a lot of people may not fully understand yet. And it took me also myself a while to fully grasp the complexity. But we as human beings have been so obsessed about automation, whether that's manual automation or machinery or code or computation. We see that as a next unlock, right? Like if we can automate these mundane tasks such as, taxes or reporting or X and Y, we opened a new door for it, but we're adding things such as simplification, ease, the magic moment. And you guys are adding things like privacy, compute power, as well as storage. And I think all of this needs to be orchestrated, stitched together where consumer and developers can be like, yep, I'll buy that because it's easy. And I think, how do you get there? How do we get there? And how does the entire industry get there without focusing on the short-term vision things? And I think that's a true unlock I think we at Mighty is trying to do. And I think that's the most important element as the crypto industry tries to move forward this narrative that, we are important and I think consumers should pay attention, but here are the tools to prove that. And I think we are that step towards that.
Awesome. Let's zoom out a little bit, right? So what you're building is the SDK. And the beauty about the SDK that you're building is, as we said a couple of times in this chat already, it dramatically simplifies the experience for developers, and at the same time, it makes privacy, something that comes by default. The beauty about something like this is, if it's successful, everybody should build with this, right? Like everything should be built with the stack. But there's no point in going for a different route because you're giving all the modules, you're making it so simple that literally anyone can do this, right? And as you said yourself at the beginning of the call, ideally privacy is just there, right? Without you even having to be aware of it, without you having to play around with these technologies. But I think the beauty about having all of the upside and the end game being that ultimately all applications will be developed that way, is like, how do you get started, right? What are the first showcases? What are the first use cases? What are the first things that are being built with that stack? So I'm wondering how you're thinking about go-to-market, how you're thinking about visualizing what it can do, and what sort of the first things are that will open people's eyes and what can be done with your stack.
Yeah, I think for us is to illustrate with an example. We're working with Nillion and Polygon and Movement Labs, to name a few. Our core goal is to put out an example to showcase how it works with what we create with our own SDK. We're dogfooding it. Most Web3 products out there, they don't actually put out a product to demonstrate how it all works together. We want to showcase to the world, like what OpenAI did with ChatGPT, put out as sort of a consumer taste on the mobile side to say, hey, don't just trust our mighty stack. Trust, try it out yourself and see and play around with it, because I think product beauty speaks more than just my words, right? Like, don't take my word. You should never take my word. You should go try it, play with it. If you don't like it, let us know why, and we'll improve. And I think that's the general gist we have, and hopefully that will prove the ground to opening the door for what could be created, right? And so, like OpenAI, we're opening up, the front doors for consumer access to try, but also having the API endpoints and SDKs for developers to tweak with. So of course, our core goal is to target any AI-based hackathons, whether in Web 2 or Web 3, because we believe in limitless boundaries. It shouldn't just be restricted to the Web 3. And so our core goal, as we integrate with more, Web 3, we also want to bring in more Web 2. Like, it would be cool to bring in payroll. It would be cool to bring in, reporting tax services. That way, it all just seems magically moment when you ask your AI, do X and Y for me, because our lives isn't compartmentalized with just Web 2 or Web 3. It's all of our lives is everything, mostly Web 2. So if we want to actually have success, we see as our go-to-market is to target more widespread things. And, being that I live in San Francisco, there's a lot of AI communities here. So I do want to become the voice where there shouldn't be a boundary separation, but rather, this open, vast market to tap into. So our whole core goal is to teach people what Mighty Stack is trying to do by holding things like hackathons, seminars, academies, but also provide ways for people to have success if they do build a successful start with Mighty Stack. So as well as with our partners.
I cannot actually underline how important that is, right? I mean, based on our experience working on this for the last 3 years, and I've been working on this since inception. It is very difficult for people initially, I think, to sometimes comprehend exactly, what that could mean. Because particularly if you build on an infra layer, if you build on a stack layer, the opportunities are boundless, right? There are infinite opportunities of what could happen with the stack, but you need to visualize it, I think, to some extent. And that can be either with pointing to a particular use case, or ideally, what you sort of emphasized here in your last point, building out a consumer-facing app that everybody can use and they can see how simple it is. And then you can relate it back to the stack that has enabled it, right? To open people's eyes of what's actually possible. Obviously, I've seen your demo, so I sort of see why I can, attest to that being extremely exciting for people to see and use, right? And I think that's just like also from our experience, critical thing, because we have seen in our journey that talking about privacy and technologies, talking about what it could unlock is interesting, but a lot of people, I think particularly in the early days, have not fully comprehended what they could mean. And only when we actually pointed to use cases, only when we actually pointed to something tangible, and obviously specifically with use cases that felt very personal, like AI specifically nowadays, right? People really started to open their eyes. And, that's not since yesterday, that's a while ago where we realized this, but like initially it was harder for us, where we didn't have those clear use cases that people were looking for. There were meta use cases, of course, that could potentially be unlocked with our technology, but only when we really pointed to specifics, I think is where people started to really become aware of how incredibly important this technology is. I think likewise for you, if you have these particular examples and use cases and applications with people to interface, it will be a huge unlock for you in positioning your stack, I think.
Yeah, and I think if you look throughout any successful frameworks, Apple, for example, they have their own baseline apps, right? Whether or not you like them or hate them, like, Notes app or Messenger app, they provide a baseline for anyone to build, right? There's always new innovation coming out. And we see this also with most tech frameworks. There's always a get started example. Why don't we do the same for Web3, right? Like most don't do that in a way that conceptualize cross ecosystem, not just only within their stack. And I think I invite all of our Web3 partners and beyond to try to do this so that we can showcase to the world more is possible, because we have entered the age of aggregation and abstraction. A lot can be done. Magic moments can be made, like passkey sign in with wallet or smart wallet or whatever you want to call it. Is a truly a pivotal moment for Web3, both on a security side as well as usability, right? And I think a lot of business partners out there that are putting out products have transformed how engagement with these products have become. And so I invite more to come as we enter this next age where these experiences will help push what everyday users think about Web3. And I think that is probably our hope and what we think will truly unlock the industry.
So we've talked about abstracting away a lot of the complexities across various different verticals, crypto, Web 2. But one of the things that I wanted to dig deeper into is something you mentioned before we started recording here today, which was thinking about how to make privacy invisible. Because, historically, I think we could all agree that privacy solutions added friction, did not remove it. And for that reason, sometimes people didn't opt in, right? Even if they thought it could provide some sort of benefit. So I'm curious how you think about that, making privacy invisible, and how that connects to your building on Nillion and why you decided to do so.
Yeah, I think for us it's about compartmentalizing it with like modules like compliance, on ramp. All that hides away much of what we think are common behaviors or privacy. For example, when you sign up with something, you by default are in the local vault when you put in information such as your name, your information when you sign up. It's only then when you want to register, you could choose then to, send an encrypted copy of your data from your local vault to our services. We don't have access to it because we don't have your private keys. And that by default design is important. Or you can operate locally, but of course, services might be limited to what's available locally. And I think that's like the first step we enable. The second is, as application become more complex, one of the things is it's going to have to leverage things that knows about you. So how do you leverage something that knows a little bit about you but don't want to store? We all know that if you store third-party data or third-party private data, you are at risk of being hacked. And we know we experience every day companies get hacked all the time. So how do you reduce liability for developers who want to build, who wants to touch private data but don't want to store it? And I think this is where private compute, privacy preserving algorithms come into play, right? Where for the first time, because of compute power and CPU and innovations have gotten better, we now have the ability to tap into these processes, whether FHE or ZK or other sort of circuits that we can tap into. That brings a whole new world of capabilities. And I think we've seen this time and time again, where the whole core of privacy preserving is to make it invisible, right? People love using incognitos. People love using these services. We think we're taking those same principles and building it into our services. So going back to the example of the tax reporting, that situation will require all a hands-on coordination between the on-device AI or the local AI plus a privacy preserving or private blind computing resource like Nillion. And I think that has to be done in a way that is ensuring that no data leaks. But that's only between you and a private data compute. That doesn't bring in a third party where it might need that data to compute. So how do we leverage that? Another idea could be that you can leverage something like a deployed service that maybe like a small little box of Nillion compute that allows only a certain address or private or public key to access that data. And we also take that into account where any application created on our website or service will have three keys. One is public key, private key, as well as a symmetric key. And all private data is encrypted by the symmetric key, but sharing is done through a public private key set. So behind the scene, all that's happening invisibly. The developers don't need to notice. The application layer interacting with it just uses an API key, but they never have to store any private data. If they get hacked, the only thing is hopefully non-identifying keys and IDs for the data they're trying to access, but not like my first name Johnny or anything like that. That's going to hopefully be kept in a secure environment where encryption and access control takes place. So that's how we think about, because I think the interactivity of that opens up a whole new world where developers can just build without having to worry about compliance, or hopefully less compliance risk.
Awesome. Would love to sort of look into the next steps on your side. So, what does your roadmap look like in the first quarter, second quarter this year? What are your next steps from where you are today to make the next milestone?
Yeah, good question. We are focusing right now on building out some of our core steps that we want to build out first in the sense of our submodules. As we get better sense of what works with different agentic throughputs in both performance, we will then encapsulate all those things that we learn into an SDK targeting mobile, as well as in the future Python and JavaScript, and we will announce that as we go. But our whole idea is we're working with our partners to make sure our timelines work well with them, as well as linking up with our own private dev net. So that is aiming around Q1, Q2. And then testnet shortly afterwards.
Where can developers that are looking to get started on the Mighty Stack get started, right? Like, what's the first step here?
Yeah, so we don't have too much information published yet because we're still in the process of iterating and building out our framework. But we invite you guys to check out MightyNetwork.ai. Follow us on Twitter. There you will also find our light paper or manifesto. And give us come to our Discord. We're building a community and love to hear from you. If you're interested in this space, we love to hear what you want to build, and love to keep you posted on our roadmap as well.
We'll be sure to share this across all our socials. So I'm sure you're going to have plenty of developers coming in wanting to take advantage of the tooling that you've outlined today. A lot of really exciting use cases that this enables and unlocks. Things that I personally would want to use and that I've been in need of. So, it's been a pleasure having you on today, Johnny. Anything else that you'd like to cover before we hop off?
Yeah, I think thank you so much for the opportunity. We're here to serve you guys as the developer and the ecosystem wide. All we want is to make everyone successful, and at the end of the day, we would love to see more adopters of Web3 to make it invisible. So appreciate all the helps and the partnership we've had so far, and appreciate you, the listener, to giving us the chance to spread our gospels.